I'm originally from a state where the weather is predominantly hot year-round, and to be honest, I'm not a big fan of warm weather. So when winter comes, I like to have my windows open and spend as much time outside as I can. The temperature tends to average around the 50s, but that's besides the point. It was one of those chilly winter nights. I was about 10 years of age, and the only people home were my 2 nannies and me. They were at the other side of the house watching TV while I was in my room. It was getting late, around 10 p.m, so I decided to take a shower and hop into bed. Everything was fine. I hopped out of the shower and got ready for bed. At this point, I should quickly go over the layout of my room. It's rectangular and has 2 windows facing the front door entrance to my house. From my windows, you can see a walkway to the front door, and the path is sort of gated in brick. Basically, you'd have to enter the driveway, turn left, and walk down a path that leads to my front door. My bed faces one of those windows, and I can see all the way down the path. Both windows have a mesh screen. This is where things get scary. Like I mentioned earlier, I had the window facing my bed open to let the cold air in. My room was well lit, so it's hard to see anything through the window. However, as soon as I turned off the light, I see the figure of a man with his face pressured against the screen. In that moment, I felt his piercing gaze. He was motionless and smiling. He had facial hair that looked as if his whole face was covered in fur, and the hair on his head was the same length. I briefly thought I was imagining this, and was seeing something that wasn't there because of all the foliage outside my window. I had taken a couple of quick steps forward to the window to get a look before I confirmed what I saw was real. This all happened in a matter of 10 or so seconds. I bolted out of the room and towards the room my nannies were in. The hallways in my house are narrow, long, and large windows face the entrance. I didn't dare to look out. I reached the room that my nannies were in and I told them what had happened. And they just laughed. To be quite honest, I guess it was a boy who cried wolf situation. I was always a prankster and had a bit of an imagination, so it was hard to take me seriously when I was younger. I had to beg them to check with me. And from what I can remember, they took it seriously. We got to the room and there was no one there. My window screen was left untouched and the man was gone. I don't think they were totally convinced, and neither were my parents. I couldn't sleep in the room for days because of the incident, and nothing was done about it. My house didn't even have an alarm system, so there was nothing stopping this person from coming back. I'm still disappointed in how things were handled, and I had no power over anything. I had no idea how long that guy was out there for, and if he was watching me undress and then dress myself again as I showered. I remember how fucked up his smile was. It was menacing. I'm glad that I wasn't harmed by this man, and that was his only visit. Or at least I hope. I stopped opening my windows at night, and I missed the cold winter air.
When I was about 15, I went on a school trip to a neighbouring country. We were staying in quite a nice hotel, with a 7-Eleven less than half a mile away. My school was pretty loose, so the teachers would actually let us walk to the 7-Eleven whenever we wanted, just as long as we had another person with us. So one night at about 9 p.m, my friend and I decided to go and get some food. We're both girls. As we're walking there, a gold car that was very recognisable slowed down next to us. The windows rolled down to reveal that there were actually 4 men inside. All of them were in their 20s with military uniforms on. They began catcalling and wolf whistling at us to make us feel uncomfortable. We scoffed at this and kept on walking, hoping that maybe they'd leave us. And eventually they did actually drive off, but about 30 seconds later, they drove past us again, clearly having made a U-turn at the end of the road. This time, their calls were a lot more creepy, saying that we were their type and that it was going to be a fun night. My friend and I were only a block or so from the 7-Eleven, so we ran inside, looking understandably panicked. We then started browsing the store and looking around generally, but we were very freaked out and couldn't really find anything we wanted because of this. We were just about to leave when we noticed headlights passing the store windows. We turned to the front door and saw the gold car slowly doing circles around the store. My friend and I really started freaking out at this point, and the clerk in the store noticed. He asked us if we were okay and we explained the situation to him. He said he'd handle it and went outside. We saw him lean into the gold car making hand motions as if telling them to go away. Somehow this actually worked. The guys actually all went away then. We then thanked the clerk and bought some food. Just as we were about to leave, the clerk made a weird face at the door. "Hang on a second," he said. The clerk walked out the store far enough just to see around the corner. He came back very calmly and asked us to follow him into the back of the store. "Girls, I don't want to frighten you, but the car is parked around the corner and only the driver's in it." My friend and I asked what we should do, if we should call the police or something, but the clerk said that because the men were wearing military clothes, it was unlikely the police would be on our side. He said several girls in the city had gone missing in similar circumstances and nothing was ever done. The clerk then told us that he actually had his car parked round the back and that if we're quick enough we could probably drive off without being noticed. Immediately I was skeptical about getting into a car with a stranger, but it was our only shot. We ran and jumped into the car and the clerk thankfully dropped us off safely at the hotel. My dad was out for a job interview, so me and my sister had the place to ourselves for about 2 hours. I watched TV downstairs and then went outside. I then came back in. I left the door unlocked for my dad since it was getting close to the time that he'd be arriving. I went upstairs and hung out with my sister for a while. I heard the front door open and rummaging through the cabinets as well. I just assumed that it was my dad. He always seems to check everything is in place before relaxing. Now I was talking to my sister when the phone rang. To my surprise, it was my dad on the other end. He told me that he was going to be getting home late and that we needed to make sure that we made our own dinners. It felt like my heart fell to my feet as he said that. I realised that it wasn't my dad. I hurriedly rushed downstairs to see if everything was okay. Several things were gone. The front door was wide open. I then heard what sounded like breathing coming from the downstairs bathroom. I choked the urge to yell as I saw a hand wrap round the door and a face peer around the corner right at me. As soon as the guy saw me, he ran like hell. I chased after him, but he was long gone. On the floor in the bathroom, I later found some things like a box cutter. I'm not sure what his intentions were with the weapon, but I'm certain that they weren't good.
My father was a Marine for 24 years. He has always been serious and never made stories up. He told me the following, which he had not told anybody before. Before he became an officer, he was enlisted and was a recruiter. Recruiters are very pushy and will say a lot to get you to sign up. One day, their recruiting office got a call about a kid who was interested in joining the Marines, and they made an appointment to go to his house the following day to speak to him about it. The next day, my father and another recruiter made a 25-minute car trip to the house, and upon arriving, were uncomfortable. He said the house was very eerie, and he described it as old and said it didn't look like it belonged. The inside of the house was even weirder. It was like it came from a different time. There was nothing modern, no TV, very poorly lit. He described it as looking like something from the 1940s. They stayed for about 45 minutes talking with this young guy, explaining what the Marines can do for him. This young guy stated that he wanted to enlist, and my dad and the other recruiter said they would be back the next day with paperwork. They left the house with a weird feeling and figured the family was just odd. They understood the guy wanted to leave that town and join up something more exciting. He said that he went home that night and the next day left with the other recruiter to go back to the house. They made their way to where the house was and found nothing there. He said they both were certain they were where the house had been the day before and couldn't understand what had happened. After making double sure they were in the right place. They hightailed it out of there and never returned. Back at the recruiting station, they called the landline that they had gotten when they initially talked to the guy, and the number was not in service. If you can imagine a hard-ass Marine who doesn't make stuff up or tell stories, then you have my dad. I am not sure what to make of the story, and figured maybe somebody else would take pleasure in hearing this experience.
One of my biggest fears is somebody breaking into my house when I'm home alone, and this fear has involved many sleepless nights, anxiety and panic attacks. It has taken me a long time to overcome this fear. This fear started when I was 8 years old. My childhood bedroom was the first bedroom you come into when you get to the top of the staircase. The stairs also had this one really creaky step. I had gone to bed like any other night and my parents had gone to bed and everybody was asleep. This particular night, I was awoken by the creaky step. I thought it was one of my parents going downstairs, but 8 and very noisy, I got out of bed straight away to see what they were doing. I got to the bedroom door and peered down the stairs. I was only greeted by 2 figures halfway up the stairs then. Thinking it was both my parents, I put the landing light on, which was beside my bedroom door, to see what was going on. When the lights come on, I was staring at 2 strangers, a man and a woman, both ill-looking, with sunken and dirty faces. The woman was carrying a golf club and the guy had a crowbar. As soon as the light come on, my eyes met with the woman's eyes. She let out a quiet chuckle and put her finger to her mouth and motioned for me to be quiet. Both of them turned around and left the house. Once it all sunk in, I ran into my parents' room to wake them. It turns out that all they'd stolen was a few electronic things and some money, but my fear started because in my mind, they were coming up the stairs with the weapons. They were caught and given a 12-month suspended sentence in the end. This was almost 20 years ago. This fear has been part of my life, but as I got older, I managed to deal with it. However, as of Monday night, this fear come all flooding back. Now I live on my own at the moment. I had been downstairs watching a film at the time. I must have fallen asleep to the film because I woke up to the TV on standby. Being too lazy to go upstairs, I decided to just sleep on the settee. I had left the curtains of my living room open as I couldn't be bothered to shut them. Now around 3 AM, I was woken up to the sound of shouting coming from my front garden. This was followed by my next door neighbour pushing a man against my living room window and my neighbour shouting, "Stay inside, call the police." I did this. About 10 minutes later, the police turn up and arrest a man who was being pushed into my window. My neighbour then later explained that he heard the 2 men talking outside our houses and what sounded like my garden gate opening. When he looked out of his window, he saw one man with his face pressed against the living room window trying to get a look, as well as the other man standing at the front door. Instead of ringing the police, my neighbour decided to confront them. My neighbour actually managed to pin one of them against the window. That was when they had the scuffle and that was all I could hear, then the other one decided to run off. Now wedged in between the plastic of my front door was a screwdriver. I'm not sure if he was trying to pop the lock or something, but I'm certain he was trying to get in. I'm always going to be forever grateful to my neighbour for confronting them. The police told me that the man they had arrested had just been released from prison for burglary and attempted rape. I was always a difficult little girl, so my mother tells me. Between the ages of 3 and 5, I had a tendency to wander off often, particularly at the supermarket. My mum watched me carefully, but every now and then she would turn her head for a moment and I would disappear, much to her hysteria. Usually, she would find me a minute later, stuffing my face with chocolate from the shelf and the manager looking at me with disapproval. So one day, she decided to let me wander off and see how long it would take for me to feel worried and try and find her. She kept her distance, peering through the shelves as I trotted on, obviously. Eventually, an old lady approached me and asked where my mother was, and my mum waited for me to turn uncertain. Realizing that I was lost, Then in a quick motion, the old woman scooped me up in her arms and my mother's heart sank. She hurried out of her hiding spot to approach the woman, calling out, "Excuse me." The woman turned, and to the horror of my mum, she realised it was actually a man dressed as an old lady. He then began running towards the entrance of the store, still holding me. My mum was chasing after him, screaming at him. This must have freaked him out a little because he dropped me off near the front of the store. He kept on fleeing. Needless to say, my mum never played games like that again, and I stopped wandering off.
This is the reason I will never work an overnight shift again. This happened back in 2010. I was working in a hotel in a suburban area. Nice place. When I first started there, I was both a PT front desk clerk and PT night auditor. For those of you not in hospitality, I closed the shift out on the computers on the overnight shift. I'd just been promoted to a day job and had a week left at the front desk before I switched to my Monday through Friday gig, and it was just like any other night. At about 3 AM, I received a phone call. The guy sounded about my age, mid-20s, and attempted to strike up a conversation with me. I have to give my name when answering the phone, so he gets my name of course, and starts asking me personal questions, like, do you have a boyfriend? Would you want to go out for a drink? Which were harmless. But nevertheless, I tell him I'm hanging up as I had a job to do. He wouldn't give me a name. Instead he said, "Why don't you call me John?" I hang up and finish my shift. The next night, at about 3:30 AM, I receive another phone call from John. He started off with asking me out for a drink again, to which I declined and hung up the phone. He called me back about 5 times that night, each time getting more lewd in his comments and just trying to keep me talking. He ended his last call with the phrase, "I see you like singing karaoke. I love doing that. Let's go out together sometime." Shit, I think. He found me on Twitter. I'd just gone out a few nights prior with my friends and posted about it. I asked him how he got my full name and he wouldn't tell me. I hung up again and he was done for that night. I deleted my Twitter and Foursquare pages, and when my boss came in at 7 AM, I told him what had been going on. We told my GM and my security guard put it into his report. I only worked 2 overnights a week, luckily, but when I came back the next week, so did he. The phone call started around 3 AM and lasted for an hour or so, but this time was a little different. John was angry that I had deleted my accounts, so he couldn't keep an eye on me and make sure that I wasn't cheating on him. I told him to fuck off, and that I'm not answering the phone anymore. My security guard will be taking all of my calls going forward. The phone was quiet for around 10 seconds, and then he screamed, "You're going to be with me whether you like it or not. I'm coming for you," and hung up the phone. I, of course, freaked the fuck out and called the police. Luckily, I had my security guard there, so I wasn't completely alone, but it must have been a slow night because it took the cops mere minutes to get there. I called my night supervisor, who left at 11, and he managed to calm me down. One cop was nice enough to stay with me until my shift was done, and with that, I told my boss that even though I had a week left of overnights, I couldn't and wouldn't do it. Thankfully, they understood, and I moved to daytime hours, and they sent an email out to everyone, telling them that anyone who called for me was to be sent directly to the GM. Thankfully, everything stopped after that, minus a few phone calls the security guy got for about a week. He told the guy that I had quit because of him, and the calls stopped. It still creeps me out though. We think he may have been a former guest at the hotel, but I never found out who it was.
My husband is military, so I'm home alone a lot and I need to take care of the animals late at night like he usually would. The first incident was a couple of years ago. Living out of town instead of on a base, We lived in a pretty decent apartment complex in a 2-story townhouse, but the town is not safe. So a dog that we had at the time was feeling ill. I was taking him out for a late walk at around 2 AM. I should mention that he's a big black dog, so he's basically invisible at night. We are heading back to the apartments near some trees, and my dog really isn't visible when a group of guys suddenly turn the corner and start walking behind me. I glance back. Whatever, not scared. I keep walking. The guys started getting loud, so I glanced back again and started getting a little nervous. At one of the points, a guy says, "Oh, she's scared," in a mocking tone, and another says, "Let's catch up." So I started moving a bit faster. Now they actually managed to catch up to me really quickly, all the while yelling stuff at me, and I really started panicking. Now my dog suddenly stops. I immediately turn around to try and grab the leash again because I'm starting to lose a grip of it, and I'm not going to abandon my baby dog to a group of weird guys. But now, they're probably about 10 feet away, and my dog turns to face the guys and starts growling at them. So just picture this massive dog suddenly appearing and acting all menacing. The guys then back up and apologise. "Hey, sorry, we're just messing around," and they back up a little more. The same thing happens again, and they continue to apologise. Suddenly one of them tells me to call off the wild dog, which apparently offends my dog because he lunges at them, and I'm still not holding onto the leash at this point. The dude sprints away while my dog is barking and chases him. He's got an awful hip problem and was recovering from his surgery, so they got away pretty easily, and as soon as they turned the corner, he trotted back to me. Now I don't know exactly what them guys wanted, but I'm just thankful that I had my dog with me. God knows what would have happened otherwise. When I was in 4th grade, my family was still living in Denver, CO, in a small condo near my school. My brother, who was in kindergarten at the school, and I only had to cross the street and walk a couple of apartment buildings to get to the football field attached to our school. It was normally a pretty quick and safe trip to and from. Now my mother was taking classes at NAU at the time, and her boyfriend would usually watch us in the evenings, although he wasn't off work until about 6:30 PM. We grew up as a latchkey kids, so it wasn't such a big deal. One day, my brother and I were walking home together after school like we usually do, and we'd just gotten off the streets in front of our home when suddenly a white car pulls up in front of us. The man driving the car didn't seem like your typical weirdo, maybe in his late 20s and looking pretty normal. He had a clean cut. Now, looking back on it, the fact that he was in such a fancy Benz, I believe, wearing such a crisp outfit, really didn't fit in our neighbourhood. He then said to me, "Are your parents home?" I immediately got a serious sensation of stranger danger from this dude. I looked at our apartment across the street, then back to him. I then said in the most "I'm not stupid" tone I could, "Why?" "It doesn't matter why," he replied dismissively. "Are they home?" He seemed a little more insistent with this question and instantly glanced around. "Yep," I said, despite fully knowing that they were not home yet and my mum's boyfriend wouldn't return for at least another 2 hours. I figured it was better to lie. "What are they doing?" he said, really looking over us. I then turned to my brother and ordered him, "Let's go," but for some reason he just wouldn't go. I went to grab his hand and quickly withdrew it with a sharp no and looked back at the guy. The guy then looked at both of us and then back at my brother, and with a facial expression that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, he said, "Come closer, I've got something for you." My brother started walking to the door of the car and the guy was reaching out for his hand. It was like he was just about to grab him. I grabbed my brother's coat and immediately started hauling him towards our apartment as quick as possible. He was screaming for me to let go of him, but I was so terrified I just kept on grabbing. The guy then puts his car straight into gear and gets out of there as quick as he possibly can. My mother's friend started picking us up from the school after that, and a PSA was issued to the community. I still get a little creeped out when cars slow down near me while I'm walking outside even today.
Just to clarify, I'm a 5'7", 14-year-old female. This encounter takes place when I was 13. I live in a very quiet village in Scotland, and this town has never had a kidnapping before that I know of, so I was exactly prepared for this encounter. My parents asked me to run down to the local Tesco for essentials such as bread and milk, so I started to walk the half-mile or so down the town. Since I'm a really paranoid person, I normally keep a good eye on my surroundings, and I noticed something off. A black Mini is driving slowly behind me. I'm too afraid to turn around again to see the driver, but I pick up my walking pace. They also drive a little faster. In my head, I'm screaming, "I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die." I finally make it into the Tesco car park and practically sprint to the front doors. I probably looked like an idiot, but when you think that you're going to be murdered, you run fast. I talked to one of the cashiers, who was a very nice young lady who looked like she was in her early 20s. I told her I thought I was being followed and pointed to the car so she could get a good look at the plate number, and she said her friends will look out for me. I felt a little better and made my way to the dairy aisle. I was scanning for the cheapest milk when there was a tap on my shoulder. I turned around to this 6'2" middle-aged man that had greasy black hair and was wearing a tracksuit. "Hey there, just wanted to say that you're really beautiful, very pretty." He took a few steps towards me. I, being a person who really hates human interaction, started to cry silently, the tears just spilling down my face with no sound. He takes this opportunity to say, "Now there, stop crying. Don't want that gorgeous face of yours all wet. You and me should go down and have a drink together. What do you say?" I'm so scared, but then I hear the cashier's voice behind him. She yells at him, asking what the hell he's doing. "Oh, well, I'm just asking my beautiful girlfriend if she wants to have a drink at the bar, that's all." Girlfriend? Beautiful? I'm wearing a Hogwarts Hufflepuff hoodie that's too big for me, with scruffy jeans and scruffy shoes. How the hell am I beautiful right now? I looked up to the lady and whispered, "I'm 13. This is when she threatens to call the police. He backs off and says this was all a big misunderstanding and he thought I was older. He then turns and runs out of the store. The lady, whose name was Rachel, helped me gather the rest of my items since I was in a panic state, and called the police and told them the guy's license plate number, and called my parents to inform them that they should pick me up. I bought her a box of chocolates the next day to say thank you. I don't know what happened to the man, but I hope he's in police custody where he belongs. So, creepy guy who thought I was older, let's not meet again.
I was 11 years old. I spent the night hanging out with my closest friend at the time. I left at around 7 o'clock. She was about 15 or 20 minutes away from my house. It was a month of December, so it was icy and dark outside. While I was walking down the long sidewalk, I had to make a turn halfway across. Now across the turn down the sidewalk, I noticed there was a man way further down. He was alone at that moment. 10 seconds later, a 4-door car drove up next to him. It was quite a long walk to get back down that road, so I decided to just turn and watch what was happening. Whoever it was in the car spoke to him, and it just sped off, and he just stopped now, watching me. As I kept walking, all I heard was, "Hey, you come here, stop." I was freaked out. I started walking faster, and then noticed that he started running towards me. I started running for my life. Since the ground was covered in snow and ice, all I could literally think about was, God, please don't let me slip, Mum, please. I actually started crying while I was running. He caught up extremely quick. I kept looking back and noticed a car slowly driving behind him as I ran. I then felt him reach out for my arm and try and grab the hood of my sweater. By God's grace, his hand slipped. I then ran back in towards the block trying to find a house with its lights on. I finally found one and banged on the door, almost ready to break it down. An old couple then finally answered. I ran inside and explained everything. The husband then ran outside to try and find him. When he went out there, he saw the man standing at the end of the street staring at him. He then quickly ran off. My mum called the cops and pulled me out of school for the next 4 days. He was never found. In 2012, I was living in a small suburb of a small city with my boyfriend and 2 daughters, in an apartment complex in a pretty nice neighbourhood. I was attending college and my boyfriend worked in the city, but because I was a young mother in college, I didn't really have a lot of friends at school, and the majority of my friends and family lived about an hour away. So one weeknight at about 2 or 3 AM, I woke up to my phone ringing from a restricted number, and it was a woman crying. Sweet pea, it's your mum, please come get me. I immediately got up and started getting dressed. My mum has had drug problems in the past and I love her. As I'd previously mentioned, my family lived about an hour away, but I knew she had friends near me. I was too tired and alarmed to really worry about why she would call me restricted. Where are you? I said, and she replied that the city was pretty close to me. I pressed her for more details. She kept saying, please hurry, get me now. For some reason it started to seem really suspicious. The voice was cracking and it sounded less like my mother and more like a man trying to disguise his voice. They were pushing too hard for me to just leave my apartment and start driving in any direction. Whoever it was just kept saying that I needed to leave right now, and I think they may have said something about a car breaking down, or that they had a car waiting for me to get in. At the time, my mum didn't have a car or very reliable access to transportation, so in a moment of clarity, I grasped onto it. I said, "Are you in your car or somebody else's?" They said, "I'm in my car, have you left yet?" I screamed, "My mum doesn't have a car, you psycho," and hung up. My boyfriend was awake at this point and he said that I should have played along once I knew it wasn't my mother so he could go and find out who it was. But I was too shaken up at the moment to do anything. I never found out who it was. They did call back a few minutes later, but my boyfriend answered and whoever it was just started breathing into the phone this time, before eventually hanging up.
The mall night shift. Okay, so a little backstory before I tell you one of the crazy experiences of mine that happened during my 2-year security career from 2013 to 2015. I am a 6'7" male from Australia, and like to think that I'm a fairly tough and intimidating guy. But some of the shit that used to go on at that mall I used to work for still gives me goosebumps to this day. So the mall I worked at was very large, probably the largest in my state I'd say, and all the way up to about 8:30 PM it would still be quite busy. Only around 9:30 would we manage to usher all the stragglers out, and at only about 11 would all of the business owners have left. My job was basically to patrol the mall and make sure there was no one sticking around after the doors were closed during the night. We didn't have guns or batons, only a can of mace that was very rarely used. There were multiple occasions where we would find would-be thieves hiding around, trying to break into shops after dark, but they were normally far outnumbered by the 4 or 5 of us on shift at a time, and they would usually be intimidated by me or some of the other imposing members of security. This one night though, shit started getting really weird for me on the night shift. I'd say it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was standing in the middle of the empty food court eating a sandwich. This was the only part of the mall that had any light at night time due to the skylight, so it was comfortable to eat there. While I was eating though, I heard a dull scraping noise from the hallway leading off from the food courts and to some toilets. It sounded like a piece of metal dragging across the floor. I was immediately put on edge and flicked on my torch without a moment of hesitation. I remember creeping down the hallway, flashlight in hand, illuminating a good 6 or 7 meters in front of me. As I got closer and closer to the end of the hall, the noise became louder and louder until I was at the end of the hallway and there were the toilet doors to the left and right of me. I could tell the sound was coming from the female toilets though. I gripped the handle and opened the door a tiny little crack. The noise was now very clear and had me not scared, but confused. I yelled, "Oi, who's in there?" The noise quickly stopped. I paused a moment, listening hard through the tiny crack of the door, and I swear to fucking God, I could hear breathing. Low, male breathing. I shut the door, still gripping the handle tightly, and flicked on my radio. "This is 1-3. I need help in food court bathrooms. I think someone's here." No response. This was really strange, and it put me further on edge. Policy was to always answer the radio, and now I was truly becoming quite alarmed. "This is 1-3. Does anyone copy?" Still no response. And I remember whispering to myself, "What the actual fuck?" I again opened the door a tiny crack. "Listen, mate," I said, sounding as intimidating as possible. "If you don't fucking come out with your hands up, you're going to end up eating your teeth tonight. Do you want that?" I sat there at the door, quite honestly terrified at this point, but there was no response. In fact, now there was no noise at all. I yelled into the bathroom, "Okay, mate, I'm coming in. If you do anything stupid, it's not my fault you'll never walk again." I tried my hardest to sound scary, but my voice was quivering at this point. This whole situation made no sense at all. Why would someone be in the female bathrooms? What was that metal noise? What the fuck is even happening? I slowly opened the door and scanned my flashlight slowly across the room. All the cubicles were open, but other than that, the room was totally empty. I was totally shitting myself about now. I was definitely losing it. I walked into the centre of the bathroom, closing the door behind me. Scared to the core, I let out a faint, "This is some horror movie shit, come out," when I heard the long, whining squeak of the door behind me. I span around, basically crying at this point, and shone my torch on a fucking massive man, at least a head taller than me, or so it seemed in my state at the time. He was Caucasian, and at least in his 40s with matted grey hair all over his forehead. He was mid-opening the door, but he stopped dead still in the middle of his action. He just looked at me, smiling this guilty fucking smile, like a kid would make when he gets caught stealing biscuits or some shit like that. I'm not gonna lie, I was so scared I froze. He lifted his finger up to his mouth. "Shh," before swinging the door open all the way, and sprinting out with what looked like some type of small metal box in his hand. Turns out, he was just behind the toilet door when I was opening it, and I totally missed him. I was so fucking close to him, I didn't even fucking notice him. He could have killed me if he had a knife or something, and that thought still haunts me to this day. Later that night, my radio miraculously started working again, and I got right on to telling my co-workers about my story. They collectively went pale when I told them what happened. They all had similar stories, but none of them were as much of a close shave as mine. I worked the night shift for another week after that before I quit. I'm not sticking around in a job like that. I needed help, and for some reason my radio fucked itself.
This took place about 4 or 5 years back. I had a nice house in a nice neighbourhood. Nothing too odd for security. We just got a camera put above our front door so that way we could see who was coming and going. The camera also had an audio interface so that way I could talk to people if I had to. So one day, In the middle of the summer, somebody rang our doorbell. I got up to see our video screen and turned it on to view the person who rang the doorbell. I saw a woman with sandy brown hair standing there, staring directly at the door. "Yes?" I said through the intercom. She replied back in a squeakish, childish voice. "We're selling cookies, mister. Come out and buy some." I looked at this woman and she literally had nothing on her. She literally had no cookies, no clipboard, nothing. "I see you and I know that you're not a child." She quickly looked around very scared, looking directly at the camera, and suddenly ran off down the street. I'm never buying cookies from now on.
I've been reading stories on here for a while now, and figured I'd post my own. I had to get my brother to help recount this, as I was 12 at the time, and scared shitless as a result. This happened about 6 years ago. As stated, I was about 12, and my brother was 26 at the time. My brother had been serving in the US Army for several years when this happened, and was deploying to the Middle East on his second deployment, if I remember correctly. Also of note is that he is a Green Beret, and had recently, 3 or 4 months prior to this trip, completed the Army Special Forces qualification course, Robin stage and all that, and by then was an active duty SF engineer sergeant. Definitely not someone you'd want to fuck around with. Given that we both grew up with a passion for the outdoors, he thought it would be nice to take me on a backpacking trip in northern Alabama, the Sipsey Wilderness for those familiar with the area, before he left for 9 months. The trip had gone smoothly up until the third night we were camping out. Around 8 PM we had our camp set up, eaten dinner and were sitting by the fire talking about typical boy shit, guns, girls, etc. For some reference, our spot was about 50 yards from the large stream, and about 50 yards downhill adjacent to the large path. Our camp, the stream, and the path formed a triangle of sorts. It was summertime in Alabama, so it wasn't quite dark yet when 2 guys, who looked to be in their late 20s, wandered up and asked if we had seen any hogs while we were hiking around. Given that this is rural Alabama, we actually had seen some farther into the wilderness area, and told them so. Even though they were relatively polite, my brother called them good old boys. I got a seriously creepy vibe from those dirty clothes, greasy hair, scraggly facial hair, etc. I think they probably looked like they belonged in the movie Deliverance. They kinda hung out for a few minutes, maybe a little longer than they should have, looking around, asking us questions like how long we'd been out there, how long we were staying, and what looked like them kinda sizing us up. They then abruptly said goodbye and walked away. I didn't necessarily feel threatened by them, and I know for sure my brother didn't, but I still felt uneasy about the whole thing. Fast forward 3 or 4 hours, my brother and I had gone to sleep and were nestled in our tent when I woke up to the sound of multiple dogs barking. I've always been a heavy sleeper, and they sounded like they were only 100 yards away. My heart immediately started pounding, and I kicked my brother through my sleeping bag and asked if he was awake and had heard the dogs. He responded, "I'm awake, they're getting closer, for the past hour or so. Just lay still and don't make any sounds." Needless to say, 12-year-old me was about to shit my pants. We would also hear sporadic shouts from several different sources, but neither came any closer. A few minutes later, my brother whispered, "They're just hunting for hogs. They use their dogs to pin them down, and then they shoot them." This gave me some relief, but not much. Somehow I managed to fall back asleep. The fact that they were doing this at night was a huge red flag, my brother later told me, but I think he was just trying to keep me calm. Fast forward what is probably another 3 hours, around 2 AM. I had managed to sleep pretty well after the first hearing of the hog hunters, when I woke up to my brother squeezing my shoulder firmly, saying, "Wake up, put your shoes on and follow me quick, be as quiet as you can." My heart immediately went back to racing because I heard the dogs and voices in the distance, farther away than before but still distinct. Not asking any questions, I did what he said, and as soon as we were out the tent, he told me to get on his back. This was a breeze for him. We snuck about 50 yards into the woods towards the junction of the path and the stream, and crawled into some bushes. It was up a hill, so we had a pretty good elevated view of our campsite. I remember, as we were laying there, how loudly I was breathing and how quiet he was, when I heard the very distinct sound of a pistol slide racking. I looked over, and my brother had his pistol, a HK USP, that he gave to me a few years later after this story took place, and was watching the campsite and surrounding area. I started to whisper to him when he put his hand over my mouth and pointed at the campsite. The group of hunters had been steadily approaching our camp, and by this time, 30 minutes or so later, had reached it. There were 5 of them, and like 3 or 4 dogs. They all looked relatively young, but 2 had either rifles or shotguns, and the dogs were going crazy, obviously having smelled our scent. For those of you who are backpackers and campers, nobody who comes up on a random camp in the middle of the night with dogs and guns has good intentions. I knew this, and my brother knew this. I was scared shitless. I couldn't make out what they were saying. My brother later told me they were talking about us, although he hadn't heard any specifics either. They lingered for about 20 minutes, shining flashlights around and talking to themselves, when my brother put his mouth to my ear and said, "If they come towards us, I want you to turn around and run as quickly as you can. Don't stop, don't look back. Stay off the trail and look for the flashing lights." I didn't know what he meant by this, but that will come later. I knew I could make it back because he had taught me the land nav pretty well. He then handed me a flashlight and told me not to take the red filter off. He later told me that the red filter helps to preserve night vision and cuts down ambient light, so it would have been harder for someone to see from a distance. At this point, I was so scared and almost started crying, but at the same time I had a rush of adrenaline and what I think now was confidence that he thought I could handle myself. We laid there for a while longer, when out of nowhere they started screaming, "Where you at?" and firing into the woods at random. My brother dragged me behind the crest of the hill and threw himself on top of me. Thankfully, our position on the top of the hill was protected from any gunfire. They shot maybe 5 or 6 more times, and then started walking back in the direction they came from. They got maybe 100 yards away, when I heard a blaring siren and saw emergency lights flashing through the woods. Turns out my brother had called the Forest Service office on a satellite phone my family has for emergencies while I was asleep, and they had sent out Forest Service officers and game wardens to our area of the wilderness. The Sipsey Wilderness is about 25,000 acres in size, so it took them a while to get there on the dirt roads. When we saw the game warden truck, my brother signalled them with the light and pointed them in the direction of where the hunters had gone, and the guy sped off, shining his spotlight through the woods. As soon as they were all gone, we went back to our camp, packed up all our shit and waited by the path for the game warden to come back, who then gave us a ride in his truck bed back to the main staging area. On the drive back, my brother told me how brave I had been, and that we would talk about it with our parents the next day if I wanted to. I asked him to not do that because I thought they might never let me go camping again. Also, I have a follow-up on this story. We never got any definitive information on what happened to the rednecks we encountered. I have many friends who have gone out to the Sipsey area and had a great time with no creepy stuff going on. However, it is truly a wilderness area, and law enforcement response, if you can even reach them, would be slow. I was lucky that my brother was there and reacted so quickly, otherwise who knows what could have happened. We also got lucky that whatever their intentions were, they either reconsidered or lost interest. I will note that when they left our camp, the game warden showed up pretty soon afterwards, but I didn't see what the guys and their dogs did. If I remember correctly, they headed in a direction parallel to the stream, away from the trail, inaccessible to any kind of vehicle. Maybe the warden continued on and took another trail to try and cut them off. We waited around 30 minutes for him to come back, and he said there were other officers looking out. There are only so many paths that you can take a truck or quad bike down, so any thorough search effort would have had to have been done on foot.
Hello everyone, thank you for watching. As you can probably tell, my voice is very weak at the moment. That's why I wasn't able to upload a video this week, so sorry about that, but obviously I'm back with this one, and hopefully my voice should be back to normal pretty soon. I want to say a massive thank you to Maddmike, Brimestonebelow and Debug for featuring on this video. They all have very good channels, and I've actually been friends with all of these for a long time, so make sure you go and subscribe to them. They really have been good to me for a long time, and I really appreciate that. Thank you everybody for featuring, I really appreciate this. And where my voice is gone, it's massively helpful because I literally couldn't record any more stories as it was, so it was a massive help. Oh, and before I forget, the merchandise is basically done now. It's around 90% complete, so very soon I'm going to be able to start posting some stuff up, so make sure you all stay posted for that. And if you have anything you'd like to see me do, like specific colours for merchandise or whatever, just leave it in the comments below. I hope you're all having a great day and take care. Goodbye everyone.